Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Lollipop and this video is going to be a full comparison on the Fuel EX lineup from Trek, focusing on the aluminum frame models for 2021. But before we get into this video, I did promise that I would announce the winners of the Vaunt Bike Light giveaway from last week, and there were 8 people who entered in for the Pyro Light set and 25 for the Breeze, and I messaged you both on the original video, but I'll post your names in the pinned comment on this video as well, so congratulations to Nathan and Marcial. But let's continue the video. I'm going to cover all the similarities and differences between the Trek Fuel EX5, Fuel EX7, Fuel EX8GX, and Fuel EX8XT to hopefully make it easier for everyone to figure out which bike fits your riding style and your price range. As always, I will be covering all of the various components like the suspension forks, the brakes, and the drivetrains in detail, and then I'll be making and completing these 3 tables to show all of those differences in one place at the end of this video. I'll also talk about my personal opinions on this lineup and which bike I think is the best at the end. Now, if you are interested in bike comparison videos like this one, I have made a ton of them on my channel from different brands like Trek and Specialized, and if you are wondering what the differences between the 2020 and 2021 versions of these bikes are, I'll add a link to a video I made on that as well. But with that intro out of the way, let's get into the background of the Fuel EX range. The Trek Fuel EX bikes are some of Trek's most popular bikes, and they have a ton of different models in the range, going from around $2,000 all the way to $9,000. There are aluminum and carbon fiber frame versions of these bikes, but in this video I will only be covering the less expensive aluminum frame models. These bikes are essentially your do-it-all full suspension trail bikes from Trek, so they'll be great at uphill climbing and descending, and will totally work as your only bikes since they can handle almost all the trails that you throw at them. Most of the aluminum frame models are offered in sizes extra small to extra large, so we do have a lot of different sizes available, but only the extra small and small frame size bikes will come with a curved top tube to make it easier to get on and off of the bike. Additionally, it should be mentioned that all the bikes come with 29-inch diameter wheels, except the extra small frame size, which only comes with 27.5-inch diameter wheels to make it more comfortable for that specific rider. And the small frame size bike is the only size that allows you to choose which wheel size you prefer. Alright, now let's get into the actual comparison. I'm going to start off by listing all the shared components between the 4 bikes first, so we have something to work off of. And actually, there is only one part that is shared among these bikes, and that is the Fuel EX aluminum frame. Every single other part on the Fuel EXs varies from bike to bike. But the frame uses Trek's Alpha Platinum aluminum, which is their lightest and strongest aluminum, and it has internal cable routing to look very clean and protect those cables. It also has some good downtube and chainstay protection to prevent rock chips and other damage, as well as Trek's active braking pivot system, or ABP, in the rear, which allows the rear suspension of the bike to still function while braking, and also Trek's Minolink system, which allows you to change the geometry of the bike from a low setting to a high setting to make it more cross-country oriented for better pedaling efficiency and speed. I'm going to show the geometry specifications for the frames right now so you can see all of them, but nothing has changed since 2020 and this bike still falls into the trail bike category for geometry, meaning it will be good for a variety of riding styles and terrains. And you can note that Trek does give the measurements for both the high and low settings of the Minolink, and there isn't a crazy amount of difference, but it is still noticeable while riding, so it's nice to have. However, now let's get into the actual differences between the 4 bikes, and there are a lot of them. Normally, I'd list out all the differences right now to kind of preface what I'm talking about, but essentially every other part besides the frame is swapped out between bikes. Therefore, I'm going to jump right into it by first talking about the prices. The Fuel EX5 is the least expensive model, coming in at $2,100 or £1,950, and then the Fuel EX7 increases to $2,900 or £2,450. Then the top 2 Fuel EX8 models cost the exact same amount, which is $3,500 or £2,900. Moving on, let's talk suspension. For the front forks, all the bikes come with 140mm of travel, tapered steers, lockouts, 15mm through axles, air springs, and they all accommodate Boost 110 spacing. The Fuel EX5 uses a RockShox Recon Silver with a motion control damper and 32mm diameter stanchions, while the Fuel EX7 upgrades to the RockShox 35 Gold with wider 35mm stanchions for added stiffness and stability, as well as a debonair spring which makes the fork more efficient by becoming stiffer in flatter areas. Then the Fuel EX8 models both use the Fox Rhythm 34, which has 34mm stanchions, and Fox's Grip Damper, which allows you to control how much damping you want out on the trail. For the rear shocks, all of them have 130mm of travel, but the Fuel EX5 uses an X-Fusion Pro 2 shock with a 2-position damper, so it is either engaged or fully locked out, while the Fuel EX7 upgrades to the Fox Performance Float Evol shock that has a 3-position DPS damper, which is pretty efficient and allows you to have a middle setting that is stiffer but not fully locked out. The Fuel EX8 models both use the same shock, which is also the Fox Performance Float Evol, but this one uses Trek's proprietary reactive damper, which attempts to enhance the damping performance on the trail by making the shock more efficient and only engaging when it needs to. Now let's move on to the wheel sets. All the bikes use tubeless ready rims with 6-bolt disc brakes and Boost 110 spacing in the front and Boost 148 spacing in the rear, with a 12mm through axle in the rear, all of which to increase the strength of the bike. The Fuel EX5 uses an Alex MD35 wheelset that has a 35mm inner width and has a Shimano microspline free hub in the rear to accommodate the higher end 12-speed Shimano cassettes. The Fuel EX7 uses Bontrager Line Comp 30 wheels, which are lighter and have a 29mm inner width, and the rear wheel comes with a Rapid Drive 54 Shimano free hub to accommodate the SRAM NX Eagle cassette. And then the Fuel EX8s use the same wheels as the 7, but the GX model has a SRAM XT driver in the rear to accommodate the higher end SRAM cassettes, and the XT version has the microspline free hub. And then for the tires, the Fuel EX5 uses Bontrager XR4 comp tires that are wire bead and thus not tubeless ready. They are 30 TPI and 2.6 inches wide in the front and the rear. All the other bikes use the Bontrager XR4 team issue tires, which are tubeless ready and are 120 TPI, so they are more flexible and have better construction overall. These tires are only 2.6 inches wide in the front and then 2.4 inches wide in the rear to roll better, while still having good grip in the front. A notable difference among these bikes is that the Fuel EX7 and both 8 models come tubeless prepared with sealant installed from the factory, while the Fuel EX5 still comes with inner tubes. Next we have the brakes. All the bikes use hydraulic disc brakes with 180mm brake rotors in the rear. The Fuel EX5 uses Shimano MT200 brakes, which are pretty entry-level brakes, and the bike uses a 180mm front rotor as well. The Fuel EX7 upgrades a little bit to the Shimano MT400 brakes, which use a 180mm front rotor too, and these perform slightly better, but the bigger upgrades come with the Fuel EX8 models. The 8GX goes to the SRAM G2R brakes, which are 4-piston and thus have a lot of good stopping power, and they actually use 200mm front rotors for even better stopping power. The Fuel EX8 XT also makes an upgrade over the 7 to Shimano branded 4-piston brakes, which are the MT420s, that are much more wear resistant and use a 203mm front rotor, so a lot of stopping power here too. Now for the seat posts, all of the bikes use internally routed dropper posts with 100mm of travel in the extra small and small frame sizes. For the Fuel EX5 in all other sizes, the bike uses a Trans X JD dropper post with 130mm of travel. The Fuel EX7 upgrades to the Trans X JD 150mm dropper, so you can get the seat even more out of the way for rougher terrain. Then the Fuel EX8 models use the Bontrager line dropper with 150mm of travel, which has some different construction to make it slightly smoother and just better quality. Then for the seats, the Fuel EX5 and 7 both use the Bontrager Arvada seat with steel rails, which is very common and seen on a lot of other Trek bikes at lower price points, but the 8 models upgrade to the Bontrager Arvada seat with hollow rails that are lighter. Next, we're going to talk about the cockpit. The handlebars are the same for the Fuel EX5 and 7, and they are the Bontrager alloy 31.8mm diameter bars that are 750mm wide and have a 15mm rise. The Fuel EX8s use the Bontrager line 35mm diameter bars, which are stiffer and have a 27.5mm rise for a more upright riding position for better handling while descending. These bars are only 750mm wide for sizes extra small and small, but all other bike sizes for the Fuel EX8s come with 780mm wide bars for easier turning capability. The grips are pretty simple. The Fuel EX5 and 7 use the Bontrager XR Trail Comp grips, which are very basic, while the 8 models use the XR Trail Elite grips that have a nicer clamp design to make them slightly more durable. Then we have the stems, all of which are 50mm long and use Trek's knock block system that prevents the handlebars and suspension fork from turning too far and hitting the frame. I'll also mention that the extra small and small frame size bikes use a 40mm stem instead, so the rider is not as stretched out on the bike. The Fuel EX5 and 7 use the Bontrager Rhythm Comp stem for the 31.8mm diameter bars, while the 8GX and XT bikes use the Bontrager Line 35 stem for the wider diameter bars. Alright, now let's discuss one of the most important differences among these bikes, and that is the drivetrain. I'm going to first discuss the drivetrains as a whole before moving on to the individual parts. So the Fuel EX5 for 2021 uses the new Shimano Deore M6100 1x12 drivetrain, which is very good. And then the Fuel EX7 uses essentially SRAM's version of that drivetrain, which is the SRAM NX Eagle 1x12. Then the Fuel EX8 GX uses the new SRAM GX Eagle 1x12 drivetrain, and the Fuel EX8 XT uses the Shimano version, which is the Shimano XT M8100 1x12. For the individual components, I'm going to start with the shifters. The Fuel EX5 uses the Shimano Deore M6100 shifter, which allows you to upshift up to 3 gears at a time, and it actually lets you downshift 2 different ways by either pushing or pulling on the shift trigger, which is a nice feature. The SRAM shifters allow you to upshift up to 5 gears at a time instead, and in terms of the differences between the NX and GX shifters, the GX just has better construction and allows for smoother, quicker, and more reliable shifting. Then the Shimano XT M8100 shifter allows you to upshift up to 4 gears at a time and downshift up to 2 gears at a time. And it also uses that two-way shift design so you can push or pull the trigger shifter. So a lot of features packed into this one, and of course it is a bit smoother and quicker than the Deore shifter. Next we have the rear derailleurs. All of these have clutch mechanisms to tension the chain, so there is a significantly decreased risk of the chain falling off the bike or skipping through gears when it is not supposed to. But basically, as you move up the range, you will see a lot of better construction quality and more advanced technologies like Hyperglide Plus in the Shimano XT shifter, which just makes the shifting smoother and quicker, or just more durability and reliability. The GX and XT derailleurs are extremely good value and are pretty much the best derailleurs you can buy without spending a ton of money on the top end derailleurs, which actually pretty much work the same but use lighter materials for construction. The cranksets are pretty similar since all the bikes use 30-tooth chain rings, so the only differences are just higher quality materials and durability, as well as of course SRAM versus Shimano cranks for the respective drivetrains and group sets. The cassettes are a notable difference though, since the Fuel EX5 and Fuel EX8 XT both use Shimano 10-51 tooth cassettes, but they are from Deore for the 5 and XT for the 8 XT. The XT cassette is just a bit lighter in weight and stiffer for improved shift quality. The Fuel EX7 NX and Fuel EX8 GX bikes of course use the SRAM cassettes, but the Fuel EX7 uses the PG1230 for the NX Eagle, which is an 11-50 tooth cassette, while the 8GX upgrades to the brand new 10-52 tooth XG1275 cassette. This new cassette just has a wider range, in fact the widest range out of any SRAM Eagle cassette currently, so it's pretty much the best you can get in terms of gear ranges. The NX Eagle cassette is not bad either, but it just has a slightly smaller range which won't be too noticeable unless you are more experienced. The bottom brackets are also different, but there isn't too much to say here since they just depend on the respective Shimano or SRAM crankset, and they all work well, although none of them are threaded, which does make maintenance a bit harder. And the final difference between these bikes is the weight. All the bikes are weighed in a size medium frame, but the Fuel X5 weighs the most at 34.29 pounds, and that is with inner tubes installed. All the other bikes are weighed with tubeless sealant installed, and the Fuel X7 weighs 31.1 pounds, while the Fuel X8 models unsurprisingly weigh a similar amount, but the official weight for the Fuel X8 GX is 30.39 pounds, while the XT is 30.45 pounds. And those are all the component differences between the 4 aluminum Trek Fuel EX models for 2021. Now I'm going to show those completed tables while talking about each of these bikes and what I think about them. So for the Fuel EX5, I talked about the upgrades to this bike in my previous 2020 versus 2021 video, but Trek definitely packed a lot of value into this bike for 2021, and that Deore 1x12 drivetrain is amazing to see at this price point. That bike is definitely the best one to buy if you are on a budget or are getting into mountain biking, since it is the least expensive full suspension mountain bike from Trek, and it has a lot of value for the money. The Fuel X7 is a substantial upgrade from the Fuel X5, so in my opinion it seems like it's for people who can afford to spend a bit more than the Fuel X5 to get a tubeless ready setup and better suspension components, and it's essentially a bike where you don't really have to upgrade anything on it, at least not right away if you are a beginner or intermediate rider, and even if you are experienced it's not that bad. And of course, if you want the best aluminum Fuel EX model, then the Fuel EX8s are the ones to go for, or if you can spare spending $600 more over the Fuel EX7. The Fuel EX8 GX and XT bikes are pretty high-end now, with very, very good drivetrains that perform super well on the trail in terms of reliability, speed, and smooth shifting performance. It's pretty hard for me to pick a favorite out of these bikes since they all have their positives, but getting a Fuel X5 would save you a ton of money, which you could put towards upgrades on that bike to make it just as good or better than the Fuel X7 if you do it smartly. But you could also just skip the hassle of dealing with upgrades by going straight to the higher end models, so I didn't actually think it would be this hard to pick one of them, but it is. These bikes are pretty good when compared to one another, but since this video is running a bit long, I'll end it here, and thank you all so much for watching. As always, leave any comments or questions in the comment section below, and remember to keep biking.